Right, I think we are all in. Thank you ever so much, everyone. I don't know about you, but I can't quite believe that we're this close to World Book Day again. It feels like each year goes faster and faster. My name's Kate Sayer. I'm the Community and Development Manager at World Book Day, and it's my pleasure to also introduce Debbie from the Open University team. I'll let her say a little bit more about herself too.
Hello, lovely to see everybody this afternoon. So I'm a lecturer in reading for pleasure, and I'm really pleased to be joining Kate. We've been working together on World Book Day for a number of years now, haven't we?
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to sharing some of the work that we've been doing together a bit later.
Fabulous. Thanks, Debbie. I'm going to start off with some introductory things about World Book Day, just grounding us into kind of why we exist and what we're doing this year. And then I'll talk you through some of the practicalities, and then Debbie and I will both walk you through some things to think about as you're doing your planning. I'm aware that we've got colleagues from early years all the way through to secondary here today. All the things that we're sharing with you, well, most of the things that we're sharing with you, you can also access through the school's resources, which we'll show you the links with you from. And most of them have a differentiated option for each age and stage. And we're trying to show you a range of those this afternoon. If there's something you want for your age and stage that you don't think is available, but you can see it for another one and you want us to age it up in any way, or have any other tweaks you'd like us to make or have suggestions, then please do get in touch and we'll be happy to help you out there. And don't feel that you have to only use primary stuff if you're in primary, or secondary stuff if you're in secondary, because though it's available for all of you to explore. Great. So, what's World Book Day all about? Well, our purpose is championing the fun of reading because it seriously improves children's lives. I'm confident that I'm preaching to a choir here to some extent, but we all know how much of a difference it makes if a child is reading for fun at home to their classroom and school experience. Next slide, please, Debbie. Because reading for pleasure matters, and those benefits that we see in children aren't just academic, are they? They're in their well-being, they're in their general development,
Please
they're
stay
in their
here.
curriculum engagement and kind of wider engagement in the
Right.
school community. But at the moment, we have something of a crisis in children choosing to read, and I think I'd like to reframe it for you this afternoon as an opportunity, because when something hits crisis point, we have to start doing something different and thinking slightly differently about it. And we hope that we'll be able to help you do a little bit of that through your World Book Day celebrations as this year. So we've been looking into what the kind of barriers and the emotional connections that people have with reading by doing our own research, but also engaging with the wider research in the sector. So with colleagues like such as Debbie, but also the, other organisations too. And I think the biggest thing that we're noticing is how that this is a cross-generational issue. It's not just something that we're thinking about around children. And actually, when we're talking to our children and we're asking them to do something at home, we're also necessarily having to engage with their parents. So this context, I hope, is helpful. 50% of adults are choosing not to read regularly either. The Reading Agency published that research in the summer. And also in terms of the National Literacy Trust research, which has highlighted the kind of problem with children's reading, the biggest drop is with those teenage years. So thinking about how we might address those kind of children who are facing those exam pressures at secondary level. Whilst parents and carers who enjoy reading themselves are more likely to establish reading as part of family life, what the other key thing about parents, and that we've really held on to this year when we're doing our planning and thinking about our own research, is that parents do think it's important. Like there are 95% of the parents in this book trust study were saying that it was important. And actually, we've been working with some schools on doing some parent and parent voice in terms of planning some celebrations for this year. And actually, the majority of those parents are also saying we think it's really important. But that doesn't necessarily translate into that behaviour happening at home. And it's that range of reasons that we're really digging into this year and trying to think about and being supportive of, because actually we've got a team of people who are on side with us to a great extent, and it's how we can engage them is the question we need to ask ourselves. Next slide, please, Debbie. So that's the framework. So into the practical things. If your school has registered, and if you're a primary school, that would have happened automatically. And I'm hoping that, given you're all here, that you have all done that. Your physical token packs will be arriving in school before the end of the month. We've had notification that they've started sending out. I think some of you have already had them. But if you haven't, don't panic. They're coming out in a wave. But if you haven't had them by the end of the month, then you can absolutely get in touch with us and check in on where that is. We have a document that describes the practical elements on the website, which is the toolkit for coordinators in schools and settings. So that's anyone who's doing the overall planning for school. And just to say, if you do have an issue with the number of tokens you're receiving, our digital tokens have also gone live on the website as of this week. Next slide, please. So we're going to try a video now, always a bit risky in a large Zoom situation, but let's give it a go. These are the 2025 £1, €1.50 books, which we launched this September. So let's have a look at this, please, Debbie. Never use video on a Zoom. That's the rules.
There we
Great.
go. It
So
worked when
that
I
is
sat on my hands. That's what helped.
amazing. So that's the book selection, and the next slide is my favourite thing about the World Book Day selection, which is that it's going to play again now. Which is you can't stop it once it's started. Which is that we choose these books for children, but also with children. So we work with a range of schools across the country, and we work in particular with children who don't necessarily think reading is their most favourite thing, to help us choose a selection. So the books are pitched to us by publishers. They tell us the books they'd be happy to have in the selection, and then we have to make that choice every year to narrow it down to the 13. And for the last 3, we've been making that decision with children. So you're now going to see some of those children who helped us out.
We selected books for the World Book Day 2025 campaign.
There they are. I think it's always important to have the children's voices in the celebration pieces too. So this is the selection. Children can use their tokens to get for free with in shops and across the country. We've got a retailers map on our website if you want to find out where to exchange those near to you. Just want to point out for any Scottish colleagues in the room who might be thinking this is terribly unfair that there is an Irish book and a Welsh book, but not books for Scotland. And we have partnerships in place in Ireland and Wales, and we would be very keen to talk about Scots Gaelic and have those titles included, but we need a partner in Scotland in order to do that. So but we do have schools replacing resources with the Scottish Book Trust that are for you in particular and speak to your settings needs, and they are all hosted on the Scotland page of our website and on the resources section too, so we are paying attention to you in other ways. So I'm sure most of you are really, really familiar with how this works, but just in case, and actually we know that for parents, and especially parents of your youngest children, this is a new thing for them. So they get their World Book Day tokens at school. Then they have to take them to a retailer. So a bookshop, a supermarket, Smiths are involved, the Works are involved, and obviously independent bookshops. They buy the books to gift to the children, and the children can swap their tokens for those books and take them home to read and enjoy. This slide is in the assembly packs for primary and secondary, so you're welcome to obviously share that more widely and display it if you need to too. And the other thing, just to flag, is within your token packs, physical token packs, you get a poster that's appropriate to your setting. So on the left-hand side here is the primary poster, and the right-hand side is the secondary. on the other side are the books that they can choose. So that's obviously a great thing to have in your reception area or somewhere where lots of parents would see it. But we hope that these the back pieces are more display materials that you might want to put in your reading spaces around school. If you need more of them, then you can download copies from the website as well. So great. And here are some of our authors. So the other wonderful thing about World Book Day is obviously we're engaged with lots of fantastic authors who create and support us with content and turning up at events. These are all of our authors showing us where they love reading. And actually the focus of our video content with our authors isn't so much about how they've written the books, or that's obviously a super interesting area, but we really talk to them about reading and what they like reading and how they read and their tips for reading and their recommendations for reading as well. So it's slightly different content for World Book Day that they're producing, and all of that is available on our YouTube channel. Let's go to the next one. So lots of our work for the last couple of years has been focused on our focus groups with children and young people that we've been running with Be No Brain. And they have highlighted things that they want to, they feel the things that they feel about reading. And they've talked about the things that have made it kind of an issue for them. And these are some of those things that real children have said. And it's about not being able to find things that they like, about being encouraged to read things that they don't want to, about feeling that they're not able to be a reader. They don't see themselves as readers because they don't feel capable of it. About not being a social activity or not being one they can easily engage with their friends about. And then of course, as you probably expect, the screens do come up as well, but actually it's not a majority position. These views are fairly evenly spread. So it's not a single issue thing, and as you might expect, because you engage with children and they're reading every day, we know that it's a different case for every child, and their reasons for reading or not reading will differ per child as well. Next slide, please. So in a very, very top line summary, and we have the full detail and report on our website if you want to dig into it. So this is a very, very top line summary. Essentially, children perceive reading as something they have to do rather than something they might choose to do. And they also have told us that if they would be more likely to read it if they enjoy it, if it feels a bit more social, and if they have a bit more choice and they get a chance to express their identities through reading. And the idea of it being fun is an unlocker. So we might talk about it as education professionals as being intrinsic motivation. What the children are feeling is that it's something fun and something they want to return to, like all of their other hobbies. Next slide, please. So in 2025, we're also going to be talking to parents. So we've done a small scale study and gone in depth with a group of parents with Be No Brain, and we're in the field as we speak, talking to over 1,000 parents and children together about their reading. But what we're expecting to see as a result of that research, which will be launched just before World Book Day, is that there are all kinds of things. Just as it's a complicated scenario with children, it's an equally complicated scenario with parents. But what it feels like is that where we need to be is in a position of allyship with parents, and to give them a moment to kind of breathe out and take the pressure off, so that children can see it as part of that fun space. So our intention around this campaign is that we're going to be sharing that reading in all forms at home, so listening to audiobooks, graphic novels, engaging with text through longer form text through even through their gaming is valid if they're engaging with it and can build from there. Taking a reading and approach. So we often say, even as a parent myself, you hear yourself saying it, once you have read your book, you can. So giving that impression that reading is the less pleasurable, less engaging thing to do, and that we are acknowledging that there's something more fun to do, saying reading and. So reading is part of that wider engagement piece, and then identifying those moments where parents can take the pressure off. Where can we kind of give them that space to relax? Next one. So this is so we've titled this campaign Read Your Way. We did use Read Your Way last year too. We just felt it had even sort of continued to have legs, that really giving those children, putting children right in the middle of it, giving children that choice and empowerment. This Read Your Way campaign feels like it's still the right way to go. And so we thought we'd share with you how that looks in some of our events last year. As you can see, it's social, it's hopefully fun. The children are engaged with talking to each other, their opinions were fronted, and their sort of feelings about the books are fronted, and that opportunity to choose in a huge variety of ways how they talk about reading, what they're going to read. It was layered all the way through our events and also through the resources that we shared. Thanks, Will. And the reassuring thing from our point of view is that World Book Day does make a difference. So in the same survey that kind of highlights how dismal reading for pleasure is in the country at the moment, it also, same children are also saying that after World Book Day, they're making more time to read, they're finding reading more fun, they're talking more about reading, and they're finding new books to read. And even more importantly, we're giving children access to books that they wouldn't otherwise have. So 1 in 4 of all survey pupils on preschool meals said that the £1 book was the first book they had of their own. We noted for the first time this year that the gap between that and everyone else has got a lot smaller. So actually for all pupils, it was 1 in 5 said it was the first book they had of their own. So there is a huge opportunity here to start that habit. Next slide, please. So we're going to run you through now some of the things you might want to do in your celebrations. And the way that we're going to do it is by using some of the resources that we've made available for you through in our resource banks. So I'm going to hand over to Debbie, so you don't just have to listen to my voice all afternoon. And she is going to walk you through some of the questions you might want to ask before you start your planning.
Yes, and use some of the staff briefing materials. So if you've come across that PowerPoint on the website, that's what I'm going to draw on in this next section. So what we're thinking about here is encouraging you to be strategic around your planning for World Book Day and trying to address some of those barriers that Kate was talking about, some of the things that children are telling us about that aren't quite working in terms of reading for pleasure, using World Book Day as one of the opportunities that you might be able to address or start to tweak or change some of those things. Of course, we're thinking about reading for pleasure as that choice-led reading, the kind of reading children might choose to do for fun at home in their own time. So, of course, you'll still be setting up events and having lots of fun, but we're thinking that you could maybe use World Book Day as that springboard to make it more than just one day that you're celebrating reading, and that this might have an impact across a longer period of time. So on the staff briefing materials, we've drawn on the Overcoming Barriers webinar series that we created last year for World Book Day. So some of you may already have watched those. Indeed, some of you on the call this evening took part in those, which is really lovely. So we've drawn on those and kind of made a shorter version to use in the staff briefing with some video clips for you to access. They're not very long video clips, but the slides have links for you to use as provocations, but you don't have to. You can adapt it, use it how you want to suit your staff. Maybe your staff are great at having a chat about these things and you don't need the video clips, you know, to sort of stimulate the conversation. So it can be entirely up to you how much you use of them. So the first, one of the ways in was to think about experiences of reading for pleasure. And before this activity in the briefing, there's actually a video clip with 4 practitioners sharing in their pairs some of their worries or challenges and thoughts around talking about their own reader identities, talking about themselves as readers and what they enjoy. In that video, you actually hear Laura and Hannah and Romina and Matt chatting to each other, and they're really honest and frank in their discussions about what they think when they're sharing their reading identity with other members of staff, but also with their wider school community. So just have a think about the questions that are on the screen at the moment and how might you answer those, but also have a think about how might your own staff, the staff you're going to be working and planning with, what sort of answers might they come up with? Do you perhaps have some members of staff in your teams who are perhaps not keen readers? Maybe you'll have some of your staff who won't want to engage with that conversation or might find it quite difficult. Certainly the original Teachers as Readers research that was undertaken in 2009 highlighted that some teachers didn't see the relevance of what they chose to read for themselves to what they do in the classroom. But of course, that research and more recent research has shown us that actually those teachers who recognise their own reading behaviours and their own themselves as reading teachers are much more effective in encouraging children to read for pleasure. So that's one of the starting discussions for you to have in your staff briefing. And also that discussion is about recognising that everybody's different. Obviously, you'll get lots of different answers, and it should encompass lots of different sorts of reading. We won't all be reading the same things. We won't all want to read in the same place at the same time. And that's something reflected when we talk to children about it. But also there was that barrier that Kate was talking about, where children tell us reading is something that they have to do rather than something that they choose to do. So it's important as part of what you do in World Book Day to get the children to start thinking about what do they want reading to be like for them. If they're going to read your way, how can we kind of remove that barrier and make it more about what they would like? Part of that might be thinking with your staff, what would they like it to be for them? And then what would they like it to be for their pupils? So just give you a moment to have a think about that, reflect on the questions, suggestions on the screen, and think about what might you do with that in your own staff meeting. And of course, when you start sharing what you like to read and sharing some of those things, lots of schools have chosen to do activities like putting up signs, with what I'm reading, or you might be putting it on your email signature, or you might be putting it on your lanyard, for example. And those are lots of great ideas for that kind of sharing your reader identity more widely with the children. But something that came up in one of the webinars, the second episode, was that we don't always feel confident about sharing our thoughts. And certainly Laura and Hannah in that part of the episode talked about their concerns of, if I'm sharing what I'm reading with members of staff, is it always the right sort of book? Will people judge me? Do I, want to tell everybody what I'm currently reading? I might be choosing to read a magazine. I might be choosing to read something different. I don't feel confident sharing. So you might want to think about some alternatives to having to share those very publicly. On the right of this slide, you can see a really nice activity sheet that's in the resources pack on the website that you can use that encourages you to think more widely, not just what it is I'm reading, but some of my reading behaviours and where and when. You could do that as part of a staff meeting discussion rather than expecting people to put sort of the poster up on their door. There's also quite a nice example of practice on the OU website that actually has Becky Denby, one of the practitioners that works with us, has written up a really lovely example of practice called Shelfies, which is a really nice way which she shares the kind of reading that she's been doing with her class over time as well. So think about some of the alternatives you could do to that. It might just be that it's a little bit more of a low-key discussion you decide to have than just putting up a poster and having to make that public for some of your less confident members of staff. And of course, that moves on then to thinking about actually considering your pupils reading for pleasure. So in the staff briefing pack, there's also then a prompt to think about the children and do your children talk about reading for pleasure? And also, do we get children to talk openly? Are we getting honest answers from them? Or are they telling us what we want to hear when we ask them about their reading for pleasure? There's actually a really lovely activity to go alongside this in some of the resource materials. You Are a Reader, the book prescription, which might be a really nice way, particularly for a reluctant reader, to get to know them in a little bit more detail. And there's also a section on the Open University website around getting to know your children as readers, if you want to draw in some different ideas. But certainly in your staff briefing, hopefully you'll get people to begin the conversations around getting to know their children as readers, and particularly around reading for pleasure. Because we know choice really matters when it comes to reading for pleasure. It's a really significant barrier if children don't have choice. You can see the statistics here. Students say they can't choose what they want to read at home or at school. And they can't find anything they want to read at home and school, and they're feeling confused or overwhelmed when it comes to choosing a book. Quite significant percentages of children in those statistics. So we need to think about how are we going to support choice I mean, I certainly know I wouldn't like it if someone was telling me what I had to read in my reading for pleasure time, or if I can't find a book, I sort of feel a bit desperate. I feel a bit lost if I can't find a book. So I think it's important that we get in the briefing some time for staff to actually think about what sort of choices are on offer for your children and how could we support the choices that children are making. I think we've also got to bring it back to really genuine choice, not kind of false choices between, you've got 3 books and they're all a bit tatty and they're not very nice and they're not very interesting. That's not really offering choice, is it? We want to think about genuine choices and getting your staff to think, actually, what sort of things might we do just to tweak our practice? It's not about making huge changes sometimes. It can just be tweaking some of the things we already do. So in the briefing, there's this reflection slide to offer your staff the opportunity to think about it. So do your students have choices about what they can read and how might you offer more? So for example, you might have a read aloud voting system is a really popular way of giving children a little bit more choice and control over what's being read. You could offer 2 or 3 books when you make a recommendation to children. You might have 2 of them, that really follow their interests, and one that's a bit of a wild card that you're not sure whether they'll like. But trying to create choice when you make recommendations. Or perhaps just making sure in independent reading time that it's not about levelled or banded books. Children have free choice of books in that time. Or there's some really nice ideas. I know Kieran Saté from Walbrook Academy wrote an example of practice around pupil voice and choice, where her pupils started to curate little collections to follow their own interests in terms of reading. And that was a way of offering each other more choice between peers. Of course, you also want to think about those teaching choosing strategies. Some of you might be familiar with things like the 5-finger test as a way of supporting children in making a choice, or explicit ways for children to ask for help. Have we got book buddies, or can we do a phone a friend kind of activity? Or if you like X, you might want to try Y. So we're actually helping children to make choices, but also sharing what we do as readers to make choices around the texts that we select. And then thinking in that third point there about what does a choosing moment look like? And that's going to be different with different ages and stages of readers. Early readers are going to need a different sort of support to a child who's perhaps into Key Stage 3 and still a reluctant reader. So you'll want to get your staff to talk about that and share some of those ideas and really get them to focus in on pupil agency, making it as learner-led as we can. And also getting staff to think about how do they use their own knowledge to support the choices that children might be making. What we're drawing on here is actually the social, the making human connections that's so important to reading for pleasure. And I think this slide captures really well some of the key things you'll want to explore and talk about with your staff. This is also in the staff briefing. But, really discussing or revisiting your staff's understanding of the social nature, because many, schools have moved away from very silent reading opportunities into a more social opportunity. So think about how you can get that ethos right, setting the weather so that reading for pleasure encompasses choice, but also creating safe spaces that children can make those choices in. Relating that to our own experiences as readers, thinking about how we can use what we know works well in order to support children, but also getting to know the children as readers so that we make the conversations we're having reader to reader, less about teacher to pupil, and creating that community of readers so that the books that we love and share together, and revisit together are all part of the community and culture. The briefing then goes on to kind of considering some of the materials, how and when book chat might happen across the day. So to get your staff thinking about that. But obviously, all of that links really well back into the 6 principles that underpin World Book Day, which align really well with the reading and writing for pleasure framework of practice. So this is research informed work, but it's also really focused on what works in practice. So really making sure children are being read to regularly, find time to read, have the books at home and school, having that trusted adult to help find the books, making it fun and having choice. So that part of the briefing is really focused on thinking through the choices that you might be able to offer and how that choice is supported. Kate, you were just going to go on and just talk a little bit about kind of dress up activities and
Yes.
things. Yeah.
So this is the big one, isn't it? This is the elephant in all of our rooms. So what we wanted to kind of share around dressing up is that dressing up is a brilliant way in some settings and for some purposes for children to share what they're reading and their reading identities with their peers. And Debbie will be able to give you a bit more information on how powerful that recommendation can be.
Yeah, there was a survey from some of the work Teresa Kremen and Becky Coles did in 2022, sorry, where they were looking at actually how powerful peers sharing their recommendations were. And they were asking in that survey to children to tell them how they select their next book. And interestingly, out of kind of the 5 categories, their peers, a friend's suggestion was the third, with about a fifth of the children in that survey choosing to use their friend's suggestions. You won't be surprised, or you might be surprised to know that asking an adult was bottom of the list. We weren't the first choice. Children aren't coming to adults first. In fact, we're fifth, and it was only 14% of the children in that survey were asking an adult. And if we compare that, 56% of children in that survey would rather just go and look at the shelves to make a selection. So you can see how in the middle there, we've got peers as a really powerful way of sharing recommendations.
Yeah. So dressing up is a way for children to really embody that, to embody those reading recommendations for each other. And actually, we've heard all kinds of innovative ways that schools have adapted that way to invite children to have choices shared with them as well. So using a kind of Year 6 Leavers t-shirt style for having recommendations as your costume, rather than having a full-scale stage costume that can be the outcome sometimes when we invite that dress up. But it's one way, and the reason that we continue to include it as an option is because we've done some research with children ourselves. Interesting what Debbie just brought up, because that research said the same thing, that children are finding recommendations when it's used in school and children are able to talk about what they're wearing and why they're wearing it. That is having an impact in terms of the books that they're choosing, and that they perceive it as something that is fun. And also in our teacher survey, whilst quite a number of you say that it's not necessarily your favourite thing about World Book Day, an equal number of you, and some are saying that for your reluctant readers, it is a way that they engage with reading in a way that they might not normally. So it's intention, and for that reason, we think it's really important that you make the right choice for where you are, for your parents and for your children and for yourselves. But we think it's really important that parents and children know this isn't pressure here. Like, this isn't about creating a stage-worthy costume. It is about creating a clue to their favourite reading and how they might share it. We've been exploring low-cost ways of engaging with dressing up, and we have a low-cost dressing up pack around our £1 books from this year and from last year. But all of those have been designed with a purpose of giving children templates so that they can create tails, ears, face masks, badges, lanyards, little characters that they could carry around, little props that they could carry around. And the example that you can see on the screen now is a girl in one of those workshops testing out one of those packs, and she decided to pursue the prop idea and created a pencil from the Rob Biddulph books, which are her favourite. And the thing that we've noticed by running those workshops in all of our events last year, and in just testing out the packs with children, because if they don't work with children, then there's no point having them, is that when children are making their own costumes, they're making that choice about the book they want to recommend, or if they're making the choice to ask for help by the clue or costume that they're wearing in terms of what they might like to read, then they are much more engaged with that as a process, and they're able to talk about what they're wearing and why they're wearing it in a way that they might not be able to if they're just looking at what's available to buy as a costume necessarily. So that's we've been delighted that even all the way up to children have gone home wearing their costumes that they've made in our workshops, which is very exciting. But if you're choosing not to dress up, and there are all sorts of reasons that you might use to not do that, there are great alternatives. We suggest some of those on the dressing up page of our website as well. But we're looking for those alternatives that do some of the same jobs. So rather than fixing a problem of dressing up by getting them to dress up in particular colours or nouns, or giving them a really tight theme to use, thinking about other ways that you can engage with that. So you might have them come into school showing what they like. So that might encourage children to come in their football strips, or it might encourage them to come in as with like thinking about the things that they're enjoying at the moment. And you might use that as a book matching service. So you instead, so flipping it slightly, if you've got children who are struggling to find what they want to read, or you might decide that they're wearing pajamas and you're going to focus on bedtime stories, or you might decide that the key thing is for them to be comfy when they're reading, and you're getting them to think about, as we did earlier on with Debbie, how do I want reading to feel? How do you want to, what do you want to wear? How do you want to feel when you're going to spend some time reading? What's the right outfit for that? Or you might decide to do some more of the crafting, that side of things, for children to share their choices with each other. But just to be thoughtful about how we're using that moment of the celebration, is the key thing there. I'm going to hand you back to Debbie, I think. Is that right? Or is it me?
It's over to you.
No, it is me.
It's still you. Can I just say,
still
though, I
me.
wanted
I
to add, I
apologise.
saw the human library idea on the resources pack. I think is also a really good one. That's one I would do, definitely.
Yeah, that's a really fun one. And particularly if you've got older children, that works particularly well. And for early years, we have suggested that you prompt some of those discussions with parents by putting some more playful images of children reading in your setting. So that can be everything from them crawling over to find a book when they're very, very little, and to the book that they choose when they want to go to sleep, to the one that they chew on, to the one that they are including in their play in other ways, so that we're encouraging parents to understand that those first early steps in choice aren't about them necessarily sitting quietly and reading, but are about them making some of those choices around touch and feel and the types of books they like to hold to begin with, even before they're engaging with that text piece, or the ones that they're just joining in with in your group times and things. So being creative about how we present that sense of choice to our parent body as well. So these are some of the other suggestions that you might want to use if you don't want to use dressing up, or alongside your dressing up moments in school. These are from the assembly packs, initially from the secondary one. So inviting students to talk about something they've read in the last year, giving them some prompts with which to do that. And then the next slide shows how that might be differentiated down into a primary setting. And then the following slide gives you a sense of how this might work in terms of offering some prompts. So how you might encourage children to go from that to thinking about what they want to read more of next year, setting themselves a challenge that's not about quantity of book, but type of book or something they might want to explore a little bit more. And then we also include some things in the assembly pack. The next slide is how our authors feed into that. So for every section of the assembly, you've got some prompts for engagement activities for the children and some of those moments for them to talk to each other. You might do that in the assembly itself, or just use these video moments where the World Book Day authors have done the same thing. There's a full bank of them all the way through from the earliest titles all the way through to the secondary title. And actually, as another set of those videos is available on Authorify, which gives you an even bigger choice. And so you've got an author that's particularly engaged your students, then you might want to choose one of those. And then you can use their answers to the questions as stimulus for the children's conversations as well, and you might allow them to have an explore of those. And then there's another game you might want to play where the children are asking each other to recommend books in a kind of bingo style game. So this is the bingo activity, which is available as well. This is Debbie's. I knew there was Laurie's slide where I handed over to you. Sorry, I just went for the wrong one.
So we're going back now to the staff briefing materials and actually just thinking about the kind of messages, because that's the other thing that's been really clear from the Beano Brain work, is the messages that children are hearing about reading and reading for pleasure can sometimes be contradictory messages. If you have a look at what's on the screen, 1 in 10 students feel judged by their reading ability, both at school and at home. 1 in 5 feel judged by others on their reading choices, and 1 in 4 students saying they're encouraged to read things they don't want to. So they're getting contradictory messages where we're saying reading's fun and you should enjoy it, but actually some of the things that they're getting messaging around that don't really fit. So have a think about what sort of messages do you think your pupils are getting, and do you know, and are they honest answers you're getting, or do they just say we love reading? Because I know I'm meant to say that when my teacher asks me. So if you ask me about reading, I'll say I love it. Or can you get to some more honest answers? And also, it's probably worth with your staff stopping to think about what kinds of things might have led to those messages? Now, they're all unintended. Of course, none of us are setting out and going out to try and say to children, that you're not allowed to read that. But they're unintended messages that happen as the result of some of the behaviours, some of the things we do and some of the things we say in school. So in the staff briefing, this is a moment to start thinking through what might be some of those unintended messages we're giving and what might have led to them. So you might want to think with your staff at this point about, what's actually on display in school? What is it we're promoting? Is it only certain high quality texts that we put on display? Or are there books that are following children's current interests? Or is it only books that get put on display and promoted? Or what about the rewards that we offer? Are there lots of reward systems and extrinsic motivation for reading? Do we do it just because other people want us to do it or because we want a certificate or a sticker? Certainly, we know from the research that intrinsic motivation is much more closely aligned to reading for pleasure. So think about if we've got too many rewards and systems for that, that's not going to last us beyond World Book Day. We might get excited and want to read something in that moment because we get the sticker, but over time, that's not going to continue our reading for pleasure journey. Think about who's promoting things and what are they doing in those moments of promotion. Is it always the same people and the same children that are involved in those types of activities? And the same for challenges. Be honest with yourself about who really engages and benefits from some of those activities. I'd suggest sometimes it's the children who already really enjoy reading, perhaps who engage with those things. So start thinking about, what might we do slightly differently to avoid that unintended message that reading is for some people and not for others. And then think about your parents. What kind of messages are you communicating to parents about perhaps what their children should or shouldn't be reading, or what's rewarded, or what's celebrated, or what's shared with parents? And are we actually discouraging some particular reading, some sorts of reading? Now, of course, some of that might not be about banning books outright, but it might just be about the raised eyebrow, mightn't it? Or the particular comment, or the sigh, or the look that we make when we see certain books. And certainly I know, Alice, I know you're on the call this evening. In one of the webinars, you talked about a child hiding one of the books that they were really reading underneath the book they thought they should be reading and showing you. So we know that this is real. This is what happens. This is what children do. And that's not because Alice is doing anything wrong, is it? It's an unintended consequence of some things that can go on in school. So it's really worth in the briefing stopping and thinking about the sorts of things we do and what messages they might be giving the readers. What do we record and what do we respond to in school? Things like reading records, and all of those things can confer a judgment about what you're reading and whether that's the right thing or not. So how can we give some different messages? Well, think about how we're promoting and supporting choice. Think about how we're welcoming those home reading cultures into the classroom. Thinking about, everybody's reading is open and respected and shared. And getting to know your students as readers will help you to do that, to really zone in on the things that interest them and support them in making their choices. There's a couple of really nice activities on the screen there. The My Reading Doodles, which is in the activity pack and the planning pack. And also the mood board is a really nice one for looking at, what do you like to read, where and when. That could really help you focus in on some individual children you want to find out more about. Or there's a really nice example on the screen there of the Reading Rivers activity, which was developed, was that Sabine Little, I think, developed that with World Book Day. And some really nice activities there that would help you to reframe the messages about reading. And certainly we know one of the other video clips in the Barriers webinar series, Scott from Barnes Primary really shared a great anecdote about how he dressed up on World Book Day as a particular character and was really excited about that. But it was the following years, he realised actually having read the books and getting to know the books really well was much more important than the costume that he was wearing that seemed really exciting at the time. So being able to have genuine conversations could really help your staff think about what the messages are, or certainly help them to avoid giving unintended messages to your students around reading and reading for pleasure. So we want to encourage you to plan your World Book Day, but plan your World Book Day based on the reality of the context in which you're working. And to do that, there's an audit tool on the website that you can access just to think through actually what might be the key areas. So you can then decide what it is you want to focus on. So the audit tool might be useful in the staff meeting to get that out and actually share that and collaborate on filling that in together so that you get lots of different perspectives. And obviously it links to how your students are accessing those 6 reading for pleasure behaviours. So being read to regularly, having books, having choice, finding time, trusted help to find the right books, and making reading fun. So thinking through to find what are the key areas, what's going really well, what might be the areas that you want to focus on, and then really thinking about who is it you want to have an impact on, who is it you really want to reach that perhaps are not yet reading for pleasure, that you might want to focus on in your plans. So once you've had a look at the audit with your staff, you can go on to use the planning tool. So the planning feeds directly into the planning tool because the first sheet on there asks you to consider what are the students' key barriers to reading for pleasure and how do we know? So you can actually then summarise together as a staff. And when I was thinking about using the planning tool, it may be that you've got different phases across your school. It might be you want to have a slightly different plan in place for different phases because they need different things, depending on how big or small your school is. But the plans need to be based on addressing what your community needs. And then you want to aim for something particular that you can focus on that's really achievable around World Book Day. Because I think maybe saying we're going to engage parents in reading for pleasure might just be a bit too big to tackle through just World Book Day. So you might think about, a target around, engaging 2 different parents in reading for pleasure who haven't been engaged before in each class, or perhaps one less engaged reader as the focus in each class, or understanding how choice can be supported might be a more attainable target. So that part of the planning tool is getting you to think about what are you trying to achieve, and then what are the messages you want to share with your caregivers, because the messaging really matters, doesn't it, to making this successful across the day. So thinking through, and there is some further guidance around a toolkit for using with parents and carers and families when you're communicating around World Book Day. So the planning tool is very similar to the kinds of planning tools you might have used for other events and activities in school, but just getting you to think through having a really clear purpose and rationale so that everyone knows what's happening, and also crucially why. You'll get much better buy-in from your colleagues if they're really clear about, well, why, what's the rationale behind doing World Book Day this day, because you're going to get members of staff will say, well, why can't we just get on and do dressing up again? And actually you want to be able to say, well, there's a rationale for doing this. We've audited and had a look at what's going on in our school. What we want to try and address is these reluctant readers. So getting you to think through the different activities you might choose to do, we would suggest keeping it small, not trying to do lots and lots of different activities, but focusing in on some particular ones to be more effective. And I think it's also really important, that middle column around the timeline. So you can start to think, what do we need to do before World Book Day and before these events happen? What are we going to do in the moment? But also, what are we going to do afterwards? How are we going to sustain this in the long term? Because if we start to engage this reluctant reader, what's going to happen to them the next week and the next week and the next week? And that's what you want to really think through at the planning stage to make sure we avoid it being a one-off activity. And it also, on the planning tool, encourages you to think about what does success look like. And that will help you really recognise when you're making a difference. So when we know it's working, and that, of course, is the incentive to keep doing it and to want to do it again next year. So really important to think about the success criteria, or, the success markers when you're planning what it is you're going to be doing. So that's the planning tool. And I think, Kate, it's over to you to talk about where things are.
Yes. So just to try and keep it simple for you now, we appreciate that we've got a huge amount of stuff. The things that we've to help you out here a bit is to create that single toolkit that gives you all the planning information, and then setting by setting toolkits to support your planning, and those are arranged in chronological order so that you can access the resources at the moment. So there's a planning section that's got lots of the staff briefing and that audit tool, and the planning toolkit are linked to from those as well. So if you want to walk through your setting age and stage pack, is the right place to go to get that walkthrough. All of it's hosted on the Celebrating World Book Day link that's up here. And then the other thing that I'd really encourage all of you to engage with, either just by reading what's there already or adding in your own thoughts. I can see some great stuff going on in the chat. So all of that kind of practice is our practitioner activity bank. So that is an opportunity for you to share particular strategies or activities or ways of working, like with children, with parents, across the wider community, that you've used for World Book Day or Reading Pleasure more widely, and that link would be great there, and that's also linked through the packs. Appreciate we've gone through quite a lot of things, but this is a summary slide. I'm only going to give your staff one slide to think about when they're doing their planning. This might be the one, and there's also a night before World Book Day plan for those of you who end up getting swept away with all the other busyness of school but want to focus in on some of these core thinking. Where are opportunities to recommend books to each other? Can we choose a place to read today? Is there a way to collect an object or an idea that reminds you of something that you like to read, either kind of actually physically or just a picture of an object? Can we make it feel cozy and safe and like something that is a hobby rather than something we're doing sitting at a desk? How are we going to tackle dressing up? Are there easy ways that we can get children to express themselves through crafting? And then some things to watch out for. So extreme reading is a fun photo, but are children really going to get more deeply engaged with reading for fun, hanging upside down? Possibly not engaging with that reading in the same sense. So I'm reminded always of a child who said to me in one of our focus groups, you don't have a World Gaming Day. Maybe that's because you know reading's really boring. So the more we do things that make it look like a distraction rather than actually showing them what's going on in the books or the kind of the way that reading can be more fun as an activity in and of itself, the more maybe we're sharing that message a little bit. Counting how many books are read, so targets around kind of quantity can really go quite unsupportive for those children who find reading a challenge. Just dressing up, so giving that sense that the dressing up is kind of something you then go and just sit down and do maths, but you're in a costume. If you're using that dressing up as a way of recommending how are we going to use it and engage with it as part of our day. Having a single book focus across a school or year group or class. We've had some chat about this in the stuff about this in the chat, where if you have a single book, that can be a really unifying experience, especially in primary schools. Lots of us have done it, and it is a fantastic way, and it's a great way to elicit writing. But in terms of really supporting children's own independent choice, the chances of you finding a single book that every child in your school enjoys are vanishingly small. And so instead, what we're encouraging you to do through your World Book Day celebrations are really focusing on getting to know those children as readers, and what they're currently interested in, how they can match make themselves with other children who are interested in the same thing, or the books in your school that might light them up, or the books around them that might light them up. So thinking about how our whole school strategies might focus on that choice section rather than around a unifying text as the theme. And anything that feels like a quiz or comprehension that's really asking those children to demonstrate knowledge. The children that we've spoken to in our focus groups have talked about being tested and exposed every single day, especially if they find reading challenging. So how do we find ways to really be inclusive in our celebrations and not kind of reinforce the idea that they're going to be found out and not being very good at it through those. So then connecting with parents, Debbie's mentioned this already. Going live as we speak. There's lots of assets to go with this toolkit, so it's taken a bit longer than some of our other resources to get online, but we have developed a parent and communication toolkit, which is the intention is to help you out. It's a Word document, so you can copy and paste and then edit things either for newsletters or for your social media channels, or just use the assets on your digital screens if you're up in secondary level or in library spaces. And the idea is about sharing what you're doing, not only the what's, but also the whys of what you're doing and the impact that that's having on your children. So very often our communications with parents are instructional. We need them to do things for us, and we need the children to turn up at school with particular things, but actually share with this one, it's a team effort. Like the parents want the children to be doing well and engaging with reading on the whole, as we talked about right at the beginning. We want to be able to reveal some of those lovely bits of practice that we're doing in our classrooms to the children around reading for pleasure. This is a real opportunity to do it. I know lots of you are engaging with parents around reading at this moment, so we've given you a toolkit here that will really help you with that. And it comes with a lot of kind of assets that you can use, and you're very welcome to use across your channels. This set of examples is a set of wellbeing challenges, which is aimed at a secondary audience, but I think in upper primary, this might be a nice set of things to encourage children to do over half term, or even parents to do over half term, or even yourselves to do over half term, should you need a bit more rest and relaxation with a book yourselves. And all of those are available when you click into our Celebrating with Assets, which are linked in the packs. You should get access to the lovely illustrations that we've got through this presentation too. And this is my finally moments. We've also got some things if you want to share with your PTA and want to get them involved in supporting you. There's a letter that is on will be coming as a physical copy with your token packs, but also is downloadable on the website. And we've got another lovely opportunity for schools with higher than 25% preschool meals. Our partners, Rubies, are teamed up with Parent Kind, who support PTAs, to distribute over 100,000 costumes to schools, which is amazing. So you can order a box of costumes through on the alldressedup.org page, which is a fantastic giveaway. And any costume that's bought from Rubies gives a return to World Book Day, so we can take our work out into communities and really focusing on targeting our provision into other students who can't get access to those books in the traditional way. Thank you for everything you do. World Book Day wouldn't happen if it wasn't for all of you, and we really appreciate you giving up your time this evening, and for everything you're about to do in the next few months on top of everything you're already doing in school. This is the key web link. But if you want to get in touch with us, please do reach out through our standard email address or any email addresses that you have for us. And the Open University website has also got a great sets of practice on there, and loads of practice examples, as well as lots of helpful research things as well for you to engage with if you want to find out more about what Debbie's been saying too. Debbie, did you want to add anything?
No, I think just to say thank you very much to World Book Day and your colleagues for creating all the resources and getting everything up and running, because I know lots of practitioners in the room will find it really supportive that there's somewhere to go and all this resource to use. So I hope it all goes well in your celebrations this year. And Kate and I are looking forward to hearing more from your schools about how they go. And we'll be here just for a moment if anyone wants to answer questions. We'll stop the recording.